Welcome to Prevention Through Connection. I'm Kathy Samuels, Project Director for the Manhasset Community Coalition Against Substance Abuse, also known as CASA. Manhasset CASA strives to reach youth before they are in trouble by connecting parents, school, community, and youth as partners to help teens grow up healthy. Through this program, we hope to provide important health and safety information which will positively affect the quality of life for both families and residents in our communities. Today's guest is Jacy Good, a national public speaker and advocate for self-free roads. Since Jacy Good's miraculous recovery from a crash caused by a driver talking on his cell phone, she and her husband Steve have worked to educate the country about the dangers of cell phone use behind the wheel. Jacy's been on the Oprah Winfrey Show, a guest of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations, and featured as a hero among us in People magazine, as well as dozens of articles, television news pieces, and press conferences nationwide. Most recently, Jacy was profiled on CNN's Human Factor, and she's here today on Public Access Television. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jacy.
Thank you.
Jacy, can you begin by telling us exactly what happened that fatal day in May 2008?
Yeah, it started as my college graduation morning, and it was this perfect morning celebrating with my whole family. My parents and I left college, had this really easy hour-and-a-half drive to get home before, real life was starting. We got about halfway home and unfortunately didn't make it home. We were going south on this really easy road. It's one lane in each direction, 45 miles an hour. My parents and I were going south. We came to a green light. At the same time going north, just opposite us was an 18-wheeler, a semi-truck. He was going north, he came to a green light too, and at the same time on the intersecting road coming to a red light was an 18-year-old young man who was just having a conversation on his phone, according to his testimony on speakerphone. So his hands were on the wheel, he was looking out the windshield. He got to the red light that he came to and he stopped and then became so engrossed, so distracted by this conversation he was having that he forgot he was at a red light. He tried to turn left. That 18-wheeler swerved to try and miss him, still hit me, and slammed full force into our family station wagon.
And what happened to your parents?
Unfortunately, both my parents were killed on impact.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Jacy. You know, a lot of people today, we talk about texting and driving, but in your instance, this person was on his cell phone. Can you tell us a little bit about what distracted driving is, and what does it really mean when we get behind the wheel of a car and we're doing something other than the task at hand, which is to concentrate on the road in front of us?
Yeah, it's really easy to drive a car these days, and it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to feel like time in the car is downtime when you can catch up on other things. And so we get distracted. It means taking your hand off the wheel or taking your eyes off the road, or the one that no one really likes to talk about, and that's taking your brain off the road, that you stop thinking about driving. And that might mean having a conversation, talking on the phone, which actually diverts your attention away from the road. There's a whole lot of science.
Right, and I know one of the science aspects is they say that 5 seconds is the average time your eyes are off the road while you're texting or on the voice phone. And when you're traveling at 55 miles an hour, that might cover a football field. So I'm curious in terms of the research. I know that you do lecture across the country. You're familiar with some of the research out there about when people are on the phone talking as opposed to texting. I want to make sure our audience knows some of that research and the dangers of it.
Yeah, the studies I try and share, one is looking at the idea of multitasking, of doing two things at once. And if it's something that's cognitively demanding, driving a car, you need your brain. But also having a conversation, talking on the phone, you need your brain. When you do those two things at once, your brain hops back and forth between the two. It means there's 37% less activity in your brain, and that results in, even when your eyes are looking out the windshield, you don't see what might be right in front of your eyes.
You're not concentrating on the road at hand. Do you know what else is considered as distracted driving? I mean, because a lot of us are constantly thinking about texting and driving, but there's the handheld devices that we have, and I mean, a lot of people are really just not focusing. They're putting on their makeup, they're drinking their coffee, and in terms of your horrific tragedy that took place with your family, I mean, you had a 10% chance of living when you came out of that crash. Tell us about your experience after the crash and what took place for you and Steve.
Thankfully, I don't have any memories from the first 2 months after the fact. I was in a hospital in Pennsylvania, went through many, many surgeries. Thankfully, a lot of things came together perfectly right to keep me alive. Kind of came out of a coma after about 2 weeks. Started trying to learn how to live my life again. It was a 2-month point that I was moved into a rehab hospital and my brain started to understand what had happened to me and trying to understand how I could continue to live, how I could survive without my parents. Learning how to take care of myself, these simple things. You know, my brain still knew everything, but I had lost a whole lot of brain cells in the brain injury I sustained. And it meant learning the alphabet, learning how to tell time, and figuring out how to dress myself, how to live kind of in the new body that I had been given.
When they pulled you from the crash, and we have seen some pictures of that crash and the horrific damage that was done, you were told you had 10% chance to live. What were your injuries as a result of that?
Both my feet were broken, my wrist was broken, my left leg was broken, my pelvis was shattered, my collarbone was broken, my liver was injured, my lungs were both collapsed, my carotid arteries were both pretty severely damaged. I had a very severe traumatic brain injury. There were blood clots throughout my body. I got a staph infection that almost took my life. There were many things over a series of several weeks that...
How long were you in the hospital?
I was in the trauma center for about a month, and then a month beyond that, just in the nursing section of the hospital. So the first hospital was 2 months. Second hospital was in the rehab hospital, where I lived for 2 months and then continued with outpatient therapy for an additional 2.5 years.
And in terms of Steve, I know Steve has been by your side the entire time. How has this affected his life and and your relationship?
Yeah, Steve was all in, thankfully. When this happened, we had been dating for just over 3 years, and thankfully he stuck by my side. There were months through that rehabilitation process that I didn't know who he was. I refused to kiss him. I didn't know who he was, and thankfully he stuck around. And it was really hard on him. You know, it meant he had to go through years of therapy as well, just dealing with what he imagined it might have been like to be in that car, which thankfully is something I don't even remember myself.
Right. And the two of you now are going around our country. You talk with a lot of different groups and students. Tell us a little bit about that experience that you have.
I think there came a point that I realized as much as had been taken from me, which for a long time felt like everything, I had also been given something, even if it was this story that I didn't necessarily want. I could maybe do something with it. Maybe someone could relate to it, and maybe it could have an impact, and somebody else wouldn't have to live with this kind of very difficult life that I was all of a sudden in charge of.
Right.
So sharing this story has been absolutely my mission with anyone I can find, to try and show them that I am not unique or special. You know, what happened to me happens every day, and
Right.
we're the ones who are responsible. We need to take accountability for our actions.
And you even, I know on the way into the studio today, you were wearing a sign on your back. So every day you get up and you have a sign that indicates what to people who meet you?
This is my life. When someone sees me walking down the street and I'm limping, or I can't quite open my wallet because my left arm doesn't work, these things that kind of get in the way every day. And people ask me what happened. People ask me if I broke my arm, and it's just a really simple way to explain this happened because somebody made the choice that their phone was more important than the life I had planned for myself, or even more important
Right.
than my parents' lives.
Yeah, well, Jacy, we really want to thank you for all of the work you're doing across the country. I, as a parent, am struck by your bravery and your dedication to this issue. And today in the studio, we do have some teens that would like to join us and ask you some questions. And so we're going to go to our teens right now.
Hi, so my first question is, how has your life changed since the crash?
I only touched on it a little bit. You know, a brain injury doesn't go away. You can't regrow brain cells. And I am so lucky that I have a voice I can use and I have a body that I am able to walk. But, you know, I can't move my wrist or my fingers or my ankle or my toes. I have a lot of kind of short-term memory issues. I stumble over words a lot of times. There's kind of a lot that comes with living with a brain injury. So it's just kind of figuring out how to live with this one hand, basically, is the biggest obstacle.
Okay, my second question is, how has the crash affected you and your husband?
My husband and I, thankfully, it made us stronger, I think. I'm pretty certain, I hope we can't go through anything worse in our lives together. And so we're just trying to build upon the hand of cards that we were dealt, and maybe try and make this world a little bit safer and a little bit better.
Okay, all right, thank you.
What was the most challenging physical obstacle that you've had to overcome, and did you ever get frustrated?
I get frustrated every day, and there's so many examples of just little things, like making a ponytail with one hand. It took me years to figure out. Putting shoes on with one hand. I don't go anywhere without my shoehorn. And so it's just every day figuring out new ways to do things that I used to take for granted, that used to be easy to do, that now I've learned new ways to do them.
What happened to the driver who was talking on the phone and caused the crash?
That 18-year-old, from what I know, he got a ticket for running a red light, but because it happened in Pennsylvania in 2008 and there were no laws about cell phone use and driving, there was no criminal charges against him. So there was basically no punishment. We went through a civil lawsuit. He had bumps and bruises. I honestly don't know anything about him. He was 18 7 years ago. He's maybe 24 or 25 by now, and I guess hopefully someday I might get to meet him.
Thank you.
What can teens do to support your efforts for safe driving?
Set that example, set the standard for yourself that there's only one way that's okay to drive. You know, we know driving is really dangerous just on its own, and we need to pay attention to that. It feels like it'll never happen to you, but unfortunately at the rate this is happening, it's only a matter of time until we all are touched by this, unless we change, unless we do something to make the difference.
What was it like to talk in front of the United Nations?
United Nations was a really incredible experience for me to get to share this story at the international level. And maybe even more than that, it was educational, learning that countries like Kenya and Zimbabwe have stronger laws than the United States when it comes to cell phone use and driving. And to me, that's kind of an embarrassment that we're not on top of this incredibly dangerous issue.
Thank you.
This is a great time for us to take a look at two National Highway Traffic Safety Administration PSAs regarding not only texting and driving, but also wearing seat belts.
They'll test you, try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. and move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
And with regards to seatbelts, you had mentioned to us earlier that your mom was not wearing a seatbelt in the car.
Yeah, my mom grew up in cars that didn't have seatbelts, and so it was always kind of an afterthought for her. You know, she always put it on, but it took 5 or 10 minutes into the drive. And I remember that day she had it on for the first half of the trip, and about 5 minutes before our crash, we had stopped at a gas station, and when we left there, she must not have put it back on. She ended up in the front seat and didn't even have a pulse when the first paramedic arrived.
Oh. Jacy, we're so sorry again for your loss. But you know, you mentioned before about the state of Pennsylvania, and I know that after the crash and you started to get towards the road of recovery, you immediately got involved in the issues of legislation and making a difference in terms of people's lives at the legislative level. Can you tell us your efforts in Pennsylvania as well as New York?
Yeah, I think initially it was the only way I knew how to cope. That maybe if I could put this law into place in Pennsylvania where there were no laws about cell phones, one other family might be spared, and that would maybe bring me a little bit of peace. It's been a difficult battle in Pennsylvania. All the votes have, almost everyone has been right down the aisle, that Republicans all vote one way and Democrats all vote the other way. New York, thankfully, has really taken the lead on this issue. A lot of that's been thanks to Governor Cuomo. Governor Cuomo has children who are teenagers, and he knows that this needs to be tackled, and so he's made New York's laws just absolutely awesome, in my opinion.
And you've also worked with, I think, State Senator Fuschillo on the Transportation Committee. I know you've been involved. So what have you done at the state level here? Have you gone to meetings? Have you been involved at that level?
Yeah, I've been lucky to be invited to a handful of the Transportation Committee meetings to be able to share my story and, again, just try and open eyes that we know how dangerous this is, and we need to start taking accountability for what we're doing and what we allow other people to do.
Right. And at the national level, I also understand you are part of the Faces of Distracted Driving. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, unfortunately in this country we don't pass transportation laws at the federal level, so it's kind of up to the states to do something about it. But the federal government has done a lot just to raise awareness about this, and I was lucky enough to do some work with the federal Secretary of Transportation. The previous one was Secretary LaHood, and he did a lot of work just bringing kind of the real faces and real stories to the public to be able to help us all see that this isn't just the numbers, but real people who are being impacted.
Impacted by it. And then at the global level, I mean, you've been before the United Nations. Tell us, how did you wind up being connected to the Secretary General?
Unfortunately, there's a really big network of individuals who have lost loved ones, and I'm fortunate to have developed friendships with a lot of those people, and just through, again, networking, knowing the right people, being in the right place at the right time sometimes makes all the difference. You know, it all started because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but since then I've been very lucky to be able to share this story at some really incredible levels.
When you go across the country, tell me how people are reacting. I mean, I've seen you. I find you so inspirational, as do many teens that I know have seen you. How is it across in the Midwest as well as the West Coast?
Something I've learned, you know, it's so easy to see the conflicts and the differences in our world. And you see that when you travel, when you go to Indiana and people say pop instead of soda and all those little things. But the one thing that unfortunately I hear everywhere I go, I'm meeting people who have experienced some kind of loss. I think I have yet to see a community who hasn't lost a loved one, someone beloved in that community, and how too many people are impacted by this, and it doesn't discriminate. It's people in the South, it's people in California, it's people in states with strong laws, it's people in states with no laws, and we've got to be the ones to kind of individually take the responsibility for what we're doing.
Right. So what can we tell parents and teens today? What kind of advice do you have for parents when they start to really, teach their children how to, or their teens how to drive? Here in New York, I believe 16, you can get your learner's permit. What can you tell our parents today?
I mean, I spend a lot of time in high schools, and more so than anything else I hear is that these teens are kind of sort of getting this, that they're not really doing it, but when they talk to their parents are saying, do as I say, not as I do. That parents are really struggling, the business people of the world who feel like they're too busy to actually just pay attention to driving. It means we've got to set that example. For me, it's putting my phone on silent. For our brains, it's really hard to resist the beeps and bings of our phones. It's such an awesome reward system that goes on in our brains that we can't resist. My phone goes on silent, it goes in the glove box, it's in my purse in the back seat. I'm not going to use it. My voicemail says I might be driving. It's setting a standard that I need to live up to, and I think other people should live up to as well.
To continue. And what about for teens? I mean, is there any different message you have for teens, or you say that teens are getting that message about putting their phones away?
Yeah, and it's really awesome. I'm lucky to get to stay in touch through social media with a lot of the people that I get to meet and speak to. And they very often tell me ideas that they've come up with on their own, and it's things like having a designated texter. When you sit down in the passenger seat, you take the driver's phone. You say, I'm your designated texter. I'll take care of all of this. Kids who I know put a little bag in their car, and when they're driving, all four of these nice football playing high school boys, they put their phones in that bag because they're not going to use them. They're not going to distract each other, and they're going to be safe.
Right. That's fantastic. Tell us, what's next for Jacy Good? You've really, again, we are so sorry for your tragedy, but you've done so much good. Are there any other, like you mentioned, the world and Africa? Will you be traveling to Europe? Do you bring your message outside of the United States?
Unfortunately, I haven't yet
Not yet?
left the U.S., but if you know anyone, I want this problem to be solved. I want to be out of a job. Unfortunately, this still happens. I know it's still happening. I'm traveling, I'm hearing the stories that have happened too recently because we still just can't control ourselves. I want to be out of a job. I want to be able to start my own family. I want to be able to hopefully still have kids with Steve and be able to build our own lives kind of in spite and maybe even because of all we've been through.
And we mentioned texting and driving only I always say that because it seems to be the most popular concept out there when we talk about distracted driving. But again, that voice call, have you had any discussions with the car manufacturers across the country in terms of how they can change the cars in this regard?
Yeah, I've been lucky to do a lot of work with the National Transportation Safety Board, who are the ones who make recommendations for car companies. And the recommendations they're making aren't really being followed. When you start to look at this research that's being done a lot by AAA, it's more dangerous to compose text and listen to text. If you want to be texting that's got the voice system built into the car and they tell you it's safe. But when you look at that research, we're finding it's actually more distracting. It takes more of your brain energy to compose a text just with your voice than it does to actually type out a text. And unfortunately, car companies and cell phone companies, they know this, but we are demanding it. The public wants to be connected all the time, so we say we want Wi-Fi, we want screens as big as TVs in our cars, and it's
still a distraction.
Still
and not
very much a distraction.
Right. I just heard I heard Wi-Fi in the car the other day on one of the television commercials, and I was like, Wi-Fi in the car? It just seemed a little absurd. And we just seem to be getting more and more technologically advanced, but at the same time not necessarily focusing in on safety at hand as we're driving. So there's been a lot of obstacles with regards to the car manufacturers and as well as the laws. I mean, what is the overall obstacle? I mean, what if it's unsafe and people are dying in our country and getting severely injured like yourself, what is the obstacle? What did you see in your experience, whether it was in Pennsylvania or in New York? What is really the problem that we can't get this solved across the entire United States?
One of the big arguments I hear is that we can't legislate common sense. And that'd be really nice if common sense were common. Unfortunately, we think it won't happen to us, that we can't invade our citizens' civil liberties, that we have a right to do what we want. People don't want to be told. It's big government telling us to wear our seatbelts and telling us to not drive drunk, and those laws are really important, and cell phones need to catch up with that. It's invading your civil liberties, but it's not your liberty if you're putting my life at risk.
Jacy, before we close today's show, do you have any thoughts to leave with our audience today?
Life is hard enough on its own. You know, none of us get through this life unscathed. That your heart gets broken or you lose someone you love, that happens to all of us. So if there's anything we can do to make this life a little bit easier, to be a little bit nicer to each other, I think we have an obligation to each other that we've got to look out for each other, and the road is the easiest place to start, and every one of us, I think, needs to do that just for the people we love.
Thank you so much, Jacy. That was wonderful words of compassion for all of us to follow every day of our life. Thank you. We'd like to thank Public Access Television's Teen TV for their efforts today, as well as Jacy Good for her unwavering advocacy to ensure the roads across our country are safe from distracted driving. But at any given moment across our nation, approximately 660,000 drivers are using cell phones or electronic devices. A recent AAA research study of 1,700 teen drivers found that distraction was a factor in 58% of all crashes studied. Car crashes are the #1 killer of youth aged 16 to 20, and nearly 2/3 of teen passengers who die in crashes were not wearing a seatbelt. While we are confident today's program has been informative about the dangers of distracted driving, we hope you are inspired by Jacy's message to simply hang up your cell phone and drive. Until next time, this is Kathy Samuels, Project Director with the Manhasset CASA, wishing you and your family a healthy and safe tomorrow. Thank you.